Well, anyway, we are online now, so we have some technical issues with the connection of Martin Malek. Martin, if you hear us, please try to log out and into the call, and we'll be trying to wait for you. But for all the others, please let me welcome you at the 10th EVC online talk. My name is Veronika Vichova. I am the Deputy Director for Analysis at the European Value Center for Security Policy, and it is my honor to moderate today's debate about disruption and exploitation of civil unrest related to COVID-19 in Germany. The last weeks and months has been a very turbulent time, not just in Germany, but everywhere. And we have seen in many countries and regions that the situation surrounding the pandemic, but also the development of the vaccines, has been disrupted by disinformation campaigns. It has been a challenge for many governments to deal with the situation, to communicate properly. And not just in Germany, there has been an increasing number of people who, for various reasons, for example, protest governmental measures that are targeting the virus, and who are, for example, also avoiding or don't want to get vaccinated. And that's just one of many, many examples. Let me welcome 4 brilliant speakers who will talk about this topic with me today. First, let me welcome Natalie Volkel, Senior Fellow at the Kremlin Watch Program here at the European Value Center for Security Policy. My dear colleague, welcome. Second, we have Edward Lucas, Senior Fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis. We also have Martin Malek, researcher at the National Defense Academy of Austria. And last but not least, we have Douglas Selvage, research associate at the Institute for History of the Humboldt University in Berlin. Let me just ask you, Martin, can you hear us better now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
So
that's settled. So let's dive right into it. If anyone from our audiences has any questions, there is a Slido link in the comments below the video on Facebook. So please, you can pose any questions during the time of the debate there. So first thing first, let me start with Natalie. Natalie, could you tell us what the situation in Germany looks like right now on the ground?
Yes, thank you, Veronica, and hello to my co-panelists. Well, let me walk you through the situation in Germany as of today. Germany has entered a hard lockdown, closing schools and non-essential shops until January 10th. Yesterday, 952 people died, according to the Robert Koch Institute. Officials have noted that the infection rate is still rising among elder people. We are speaking the group 70 years old and above, while it is slightly declining among the younger ones. The number of new infections as of today was of around 28,000 cases. The cases of infection in total since the beginning of the pandemic in Germany amount to 1,391,086 cases, which have been officially detected, which means that these people have been tested. And of course, people who don't test are, we suspect, in the majority. So this is just an indicator. 1,091,721 cases are registered as recovered, and unfortunately 24,544 have died. Now, this is the situation. What we've been looking into is the question, what could make people doubt the level of emergency Germany is facing? And we've worked out three points to answer these questions. The first point we find to be of relevance is that there has been a communication problem on the part of the government. In the first phase last year, when faced with the new pandemic, little was known really. And first, the German population was told, do not wear masks, Then the same people told the population, you actually have to wear masks in public places. It's even compulsory in public transportation. And in that regard, even the Minister of Health has acknowledged that he made some mistakes, CDU Minister Jens Spahn. But it is really understandable, as no government of the Federal Republic of Germany had been exposed to this type of pandemic before. So these glitches in communication were common to almost every single government in the EU. The incredible slow response of the EU set aside. And another example is when it was rumored that there would be a first lockdown, it was denied in the press by government officials, only for them to backpedal a couple of weeks later and to confirm that there would be indeed a lockdown. So this contributed to a kind of confusion with public perception. That's the first point. The second point, which we find is of significance, is the structure of the government, of the German government itself, based on a coalition, CDU, CSU, and SPD. And add to this the very nature of the German federal state that makes a unified, coordinated, and quick policy highly complicated. Then you get an idea of the German conundrum. To give you an example, the land of Saxony had different rules regarding the lockdown than the land of Brandenburg. And the minister presidents could not agree on many issues, not only regarding the lockdown, but about the opening and closing of schools, the way teaching should be organized or not, etc., etc. So some saw absolutely no reason for a lockdown and were trying to protect the business, into the interests of the business community, the electorate, basically. And some pushed for a lockdown. Now, all this also contributed to sow confusion, and of course it exacerbated distrust in governmental measures. Now, there is a third point that is also of importance, is the very fragmentation of the political landscape in Germany. Fringes that are per se on the left and on the right working to destabilize civil order in Germany do exist. They've always existed before the pandemic, and they will exist after the pandemic. You just need to have a look at the yearly report of the Domestic Intelligence Agency, the report of the Bundesverfassungsschutz. These fringes get mobilized on a wide range of issues, and COVID is only one of them lately. So in clear, you read names you've read before, you come across organizations you know from other contexts. For instance, I read name I've had read during the anti-globalization mobilization or protests, or during the anti-refugee policy protests. So these people do exist. It's a kind of reservoir for civil unrest, if you will. But make no mistake, this protest movement called against COVID, called the Querdenker movement, is not a monolithic grassroots movement. And I think my colleague Veronika Vichova, who's been working on the Czech subject, will be able to confirm this. It's not the case in the Czech Republic either. It's a quite eclectic, politically speaking, quite eclectic group. It is in fact a political mixed bag. A study by a sociologist at the University of Basel in Switzerland has found out that 21% of those people had actually voted for the Greens at the latest election, 17% for the Communist of the Die Linke, 14% of the AfD, and the rest of the smaller groups, SPD, CDU, and non-voters. He had a sample of 1,000 people, which he interviewed in a group of Querdenker online. But the author of the study, Oliver Nachtwey, notes also that 30% of these people intend to vote for the AfD in the future. at the next election. Nachtwey also found out that this group is relatively old, 43 years old in average, is educated with high school education and above, graduation and university studies, with a high representation of self-employed and business people for whom the libertarian angle to their motivation is more important. And it means that their refusal is based on a refusal to let the state infringe on their individual freedom. So we are not speaking a bunch of far-right lunatics, or at least not only, or esoteric anti-vaccination activists. They do exist, they are part of this movement, but they are not the majority. Interestingly, they use Telegram as a mode of communication, which is always interesting for me in that regard, as an interesting footnote indeed. They all have something in common, which is that resisting the COVID measures is an act of civil disobedience, which is a right they think they have to reclaim or is endangered by the measures of the government. And this is where exactly Russian propaganda intervenes, because civil unrest is one of their favorite tools of subversion, as my colleague Douglas Selvage will be able to confirm, I think. They do not need to create it. In this case, they only have to create a large enough propaganda echo chamber. And in this very area, it's in this very area that specifically Russian coverage of the pandemic in Germany appears to have flourished. Now, how do I know that? It is that because in preparation to our analysis of the case in Germany, I had the extreme pleasure of consuming only RT non-stop 24/7 for a couple of days. I'm sure you empathize, and I can confirm it really does something to your brain. Here's what I can tell you. Germany, after at least 3 days, you get convinced that Germany is on the verge of the apocalypse. There is an imminent collapse awaiting us. And I invite you to do the following thing. You go online and you type on YouTube RT Deutsch, which is the German language program of RT, and you just scroll and you just read the titles of the clips that are offered to you. Please do this, and you will really be surprised. And if that does not scare you, I don't know what will. So of course I hear the argument that RT is irrelevant because it has little impact and little outreach. It's a mistake in my sense, because I noticed that it's a widely shared medium together with Sputnik, actually, in various fora of these Querdenker, and curiously, massively present among libertarian groups lately. The word Querdenker can positively be translated by maverick and more negatively by awkward thinker. I'm not sure it's so much about thinking than about getting scared and being and feeling insecure. If you carefully review the COVID-related coverage by RT, you will see how RT has deliberately exploited this fear and has interviewed people who actually helped foster a community that first, number one, downplayed the scope of the virus. Number two, sowed doubt as to its origin. Number three, questioned the necessity of wearing a mask. Number four, later exacerbated disputes among allies with regards to the mask. And I will quote here the alleged poaching by the US around the world, poaching of masks and medical devices that were allegedly diverted. That was a disinformation. Number 5, then they exacerbated the debate around the development of the serum. Then I will mention here the very unfortunate disinformation on CureVac, with the US government being allegedly interested in acquiring a German firm to secure a vaccine only for the US population. This was also a disinformation. Number 6, recently they doubted the very efficiency of the vaccine because it was developed so quickly, and they insinuated it posed a danger to the population. And finally, number 7, all this while claiming Russian superiority, of course, in solving the COVID crisis and developing a vaccine that is, of course, much superior to its competitors in the West. So this is the pool of people interviewed by RT, some backbenchers, some medical doctors who are certainly not epidemiologists, and who offer a very alternative version of scientific findings. In closing, the German language RT has managed to gain some acceptation in Germany, with political figures granting interviews to them. The notoriously pro-Russian fringe of the SPD, some CDU lawmakers who obviously did not get the memo, the AfD and the Communists of Die Linke anyway. It is unfortunate, and these people should be made aware that RT is viewed by several allied intelligence agencies as a tool of propaganda in Russia's hybrid warfare against the alliance. This tool of propaganda is aiming at fomenting, at worst, and encouraging, at best, civil unrest. Our Lithuanian and Latvian allies have banned RT broadcast for a reason. So let me spell this out very slowly for even the last Russlandversteher to understand the message. It is indeed a war, and supporting hostile entities against your own countries that aim at destabilizing your country or creating civil unrest is called collaborationism. Our RT is seeking to obtain a broadcasting license in Germany. At the moment, it's only in online media in German language. I'm quite certain that German security experts are going to be able to convey the message that this is not a good idea. And it may be time for the Merkel administration to listen to them for a change. That would be it.
Thank you, Natalie. Let me ask one quick follow-up question. You described the methods that Russian propaganda channels are using in Germany at this moment. Do you see Germany or these efforts in Germany as part of a larger effort that is, applicable in the rest of European countries, or do you see some uniqueness in the German situation at this moment?
No, in working through the various programs of RT, I of course found similar programs tailored for a British audience, where British pseudoscientists were interviewed. The message conveyed is basically the same. With regard to vaccination, for instance, they are rushing. This is dangerous. We have no proof this is working, etc., etc. And it so happens that I worked myself through the Czech text you made, and we find similar patterns. So I'm not saying there is a place in Moscow where they are cooking up the narratives and organizing and coordinating this. This is not what I'm saying. But I am saying that this is where Russian propaganda finds a reason to create subversion. They will use the same toolbox that has been applied on other turfs, and if it works, of course they are going to stay the pace and employ the same methods because it works.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me turn to Martin Malik now. We can't see you, unfortunately, but hopefully we'll be able to hear you, Martin. Can you tell us whether you agree with what Natalie just described, and if Austria is experiencing similar efforts by Russia or any other actors, for that matter, who are trying to use the situation surrounding the pandemic to sow discord? Martin, do we have you or not? You are muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. Yes.
Yes, but you cannot see me at all.
No.
Very strange. I can see you very well. Okay, that this is very strange and bad, but
well, we can hear you, so that's the most important thing.
Okay. Well, basically, I agree with everything Natalie said, of course, but she's much better informed about Germany than I am. As to Austria, and let me say some words about our basic situation, so to speak. Not everybody abroad might know that we have strange government now, because it's leftist and it's rightist at the same time. It consists about the quite conservative so-called People's Party and the quite leftist Greens, which is unique for our country. And the Minister for Public Health is a representative of the Greens, which is quite important in our situation. The opposition in the parliament, or in its lower house, so-called National Council, is composed of the right-wing populist Freedom Party, the Social Democratic Party, and the Liberal Party, who calls itself NEOS. We have so far about, as far as I remember, 3,000 plus COVID-19 deaths, and every day about several hundred new cases. But the situation so far is under control. There is no imminent danger of a collapse of the public health system. The situation in the hospitals is the doctors and all the employees of the hospitals suffer from really great, very difficult situation. This is doubtless. Everybody complains, but so far the situation is, again, it is under control. The vaccinations in Austria are about to start in a couple of days. It means, as far as I know, they will start in December. Yet. Well, I could now tell you a lot about the political consequences about the COVID crisis, but this would be, I think this I would go too far if I really go into the details. I would only say that the confrontation between the government and the opposition in parliament has not ceased to exist because of the COVID crisis. There is not really a sign of some kind of a national accord in face of the crisis. You cannot say that all the parties in parliament are doing the same or want the same. It is obvious that especially the far-right populist party, the Freedom Party as it calls itself, tries to capitalize on the situation. This is totally obvious. They try to so to speak, to steer up some unrest, but on the one hand, but on the other hand, it has to be confessed that the success of this policy is so far quite limited. You cannot say that there were or are or will be in the short run any really huge meetings and rallies, or somebody wants to take the ministries or the primal ministry by force, nothing of that kind. As far as I remember, the biggest meeting so far was in October in Vienna. There were about 1,500 participants. And then a couple of weeks later, a very huge meeting was announced. There were up to 15,000 participants were expected, but only 300 showed up. This means that so far there is no serious potential of civil unrest, or I don't know, uprisings even against the lockdown measures, or against the possible obligation.
We just lost you, I'm afraid. Wait. So let's wait whether Martin can rejoin us a little later. And let me move to our next panelist. Douglas, can I ask you to sort of help us understand, because this situation in many ways is quite new and unique, not just because of the foreign interference, but more in general. Many governments were sort of hit by surprise by the situation, and very often this is becoming almost alibistic, like this is very new and nobody knows what to do. So can you please tell us from your point of view whether there, after all, maybe are some other situations and historical incidents that we have been through and that we could actually learn from if we decided to?
Well, thank you for having me today. I'll speak today as a historian about some forerunners of the disinformation of the day regarding COVID. Most importantly, I've written extensively about the KGB's AIDS disinformation campaign of the 1980s. And for me, it was like deja vu earlier this year. I was scrolling through my Twitter feed, and a news item announced that a spokesperson for the Chinese Foreign Ministry had accused the US of developing the COVID-19 virus as a biological weapon at the US Army Medical Research and Material Command at Fort Detrick, Maryland. Well, during the 1980s, the KGB had sought to spread the same thesis internationally regarding another virus, the human immunodeficiency virus, the virus that causes AIDS. That is the AIDS as US bioweapon thesis. That China would recite this old discredited disinformation against the US from the Soviet Union and apply it to a new virus was something of a surprise for me. Apparently, I don't know enough about Chinese disinformation. It was less of a surprise to me when I learned that the Putin regime in Russia was spreading similar conspiracy theories about COVID-19 through its various propaganda outlets, such as RT, Russia Today, and Sputnik News. Already during the Ebola epidemic in West Africa in 2013 to 16, these Russian propaganda outlets spread reports that the virus had been created by the US in collaboration with Great Britain and the former apartheid regime in South Africa as a bioweapon to kill off Africans. The KGB had sought to spread similar disinformation about HIV/AIDS as an ethnic weapon during the 1980s. The official Soviet press agency Novosti, or APN, had contributed alongside the KGB to spreading such AIDS disinformation overseas, especially in Africa and India. During the COVID pandemic, RT and Sputnik News are now playing the role that Novosti did back in the day, if perhaps with greater firepower. Just like the KGB and Novosti, Putin's propaganda apparatus, and one suspects the security services as well, have not been particularly creative in crafting their own anti-American propaganda with regard to COVID-19. In my research, I found out that the KGB simply picked up on conspiracy theories already spreading in the United States about the origins of HIV/AIDS during the early 1980s, revised them slightly to serve its own ends, and then spread the resulting product around the globe. a cycle of misinformation and disinformation arose in which the KGB cited US conspiracy theories, and US conspiracy theorists in turn began to cite texts associated with KGB disinformation. In my recent article in the Journal of Cold War Studies, I demonstrate how the perennial right-wing US presidential candidate, Lyndon LaRouche, and his organization promoted a variant of the AIDS from Fort Detrick thesis. They promoted the claim that a Soviet fifth column had infiltrated the National Institutes of Health through the World Health Organization and then genetically engineered the AIDS virus at the National Cancer Institute's facilities at Fort Detrick. Although LaRouche's organization counterattacked the KGB disinformation with its own version of the Fort Detrick thesis, and the KGB in Moscow attacked LaRouche, both apparently borrowed elements from each other's conspiracy theory and constructing their own. And by publicizing the other side's conspiracy theory, they helped promote the conspiracy theory in general. The example of the KGB and LaRouche demonstrates how extremists of the left and right, as well as religious extremists for that matter, can borrow disinformation and conspiracy theories from each other, revise them slightly, and exploit them to their own ends. Often what Germans have called a querfront or a cross-front can arise, in which extremists of the left and right can cooperate in pushing certain forms of propaganda or public demonstrations. For example, after the end of the Cold War, individuals associated with the front organization of the Maoist Marxist-Leninist Party of Germany continued to promote the AIDS from Fort Detrick thesis, and in some publications, one of the members of this group cited an author spreading an alternative right-wing version of the conspiracy theory that blamed the cabal of Jews for the Fort Detrick bioweapon and the AIDS pandemic. He, in turn, had been citing individuals associated with the KGB's AIDS disinformation campaign. Of course, his views about the Jews have been ignored in certain publications associated with the MLPD. Still, they were borrowing back and forth and citing each other and helping promote each other's propaganda, or even in attacking it. In Germany, one sees a similar querfront during the so-called Querdenker, or alternative thinker demonstrations against the corona restrictions and other public health measures. You see right-wing and left-wing extremists promoting different conspiracy theories about the origins of COVID, about who's trying to spread COVID. You also see, of course, anti-vax demonstrators, which interestingly, as Natalie pointed out, seems to actually be the minority in these demonstrations, although they're supposedly about COVID, but they seem to be about something more. And we also see this in the case of the AIDS disinformation. For example, during the 1980s, the KGB also helped to spread different versions of this conspiracy theory in Africa, where they said, well, you know, the United States helped spread this through vaccinations. And after the end of the Cold War, certain groups in the United States or individuals who have been promoting AIDS disinformation, they also linked it up to vaccinations. For example, there was the Nation of Islam of Louis Farrakhan have been promoting these different conspiracy theories about AIDS as a bioweapon constructed at Fort Detrick, directed against African Americans. And the KGB had also talked about using some of his disinformation theses for their own propaganda. And if I understand correctly, there was this famous cartoon, I think it was in Pravda, of an American scientist handing a soldier from the Pentagon a vial of the AIDS virus, which took the form of swastikas naturally, handing it over for a pile of money. They're surrounded by dead bodies. And supposedly it seems that one of the members of Farrakhan's organization used that as a poster for a presentation he gave in the 1990s in Canada, talking about, the AIDS bioweapon, the US government. Also, there was a so-called Harvard AIDS Forum, in which you would have also anti-vax conspiracy theorists speaking alongside various AIDS conspiracy theorists, promoting sort of alternative health and saying, well, this is all a lie about where the AIDS virus came from, and maybe we need to use alternative treatments. Now, of course, you could say all this is just sort of crackpot conspiracy theories, and okay, people have some crazy ideas. But of course, these ideas certainly have a significance, right? The people who are trying to spread them have certain political goals that aren't very conducive to democracy. Many of them political extremists, whether right, left, or religious extremists. And also, it's very much a danger to public health. I mean, it was shown in the case of people who believe in AIDS conspiracy theories, including the disinformation spread by the Soviets, the people who believe in these conspiracy theories about the origins of AIDS were less likely, for example, to wear condoms, engage in safe sex, have themselves tested if they might have been exposed to HIV/AIDS, or to take antiretroviral treatment if they had been infected. In the case of South Africa, the belief in such conspiracy theories by the government of Thabo Mbeki arguably contributed to hundreds of thousands more deaths than were necessary during the AIDS epidemic. And we see that again today with COVID, certainly. And Russia today, if anything, in some respects, is actually worse than the KGB and Novosti during the 1980s. Because, for example, although they spread conspiracy theories about the AIDS virus being spread through US vaccination programs, I don't remember them just promoting pure anti-vax propaganda. But Russia today is sort of like a fire hose where they take every imaginable conspiracy theory, every imaginable piece of disinformation that could discredit the United States or governments in the West or NATO or even public health measures, and they just spout it all out, right? They just see how much will stick. And this is actually in some respects above and beyond even what the KGB or the Novosti would have done during the Cold War.
Thank you very much, Douglas. Let me ask you this. If you're saying that we have been experiencing this over and over again, these Russian efforts to, even disinformation regarding other diseases, how is it possible that it still works? And how do we not see it coming at this point?
Well, these are very good questions. Certainly, I mean, during the 1980s, the Reagan administration responded to Soviet disinformation by establishing the Active Measures Working Group. And the idea was, okay, if you call out one piece of Soviet disinformation, that can actually help amplify it, right? So if the State Department spokesman says, oh, it's a lie that the US developed AIDS at Fort Detrick, that goes to the press, people read it and they say, oh, somebody said the US developed AIDS at Fort Detrick. Maybe there's something to that. Maybe I need to check out what that's about. What the Active Measures Working Group did was they basically took the whole array of Soviet disinformation and said, well, here's 100 different pieces of Soviet disinformation. This is how they work. This is what they're doing. And they pounded on it and hammered it home again and again until, for example, the US Congress began to understand this. It became a real issue in US-Soviet relations and negotiations about other matters like arms control, and it put the issue front and center. I think the problem is since the end of the Cold War, especially during the 1990s, everybody believed, oh, the Cold War is over, the Soviet Union, Russia is going to be democratic, we can just forget about these things, et cetera, and, the need to battle or to be aware of this and to publicize it and to sort of confront it, this was somehow lost. And why more isn't being done today, I don't know. When our publication in German came out about the Stasi and the KGB's AIDS disinformation campaign, I was actually interviewed by VOA about Voice of America, about the Ebola epidemic and how Russia Today and Sputnik News were spreading basically the similar disinformation theses, and they of course broadcast this in Russian and it was online in Russia, and it was very interesting to watch this. It wasn't publicized so much in the United States. There might have been a few news articles about, oh, here's the Russian school again, but there really wasn't a concerted effort to combat this. And in terms of the Russian side, what is interesting is Russia Today basically reprinted the video from the VOA website, and then they had all these responses from typical Russians where I think it was one of their troll armies, maybe from St. Petersburg, and they're all like, things like, well, are you sure it's not an American virus? I mean, didn't you guys patent it? And then the next one said, Yeah, but it sure seems to be like your virus there. And it was just all of these comments where they, this is, they're very good at this type of propaganda and active measures. They sort of flooded the space of even this video and said, "Oh, we don't really care about your video. We'll just respond with our fire hose and keep blowing out even more disinformation." So, yeah, but it's unfortunate, for example, that the press of the United States or the U.S. government, or in case of other disinformation, European governments, the European press hasn't picked up on this. I mean, I can name one small example. For example, we found evidence that a documentary that had been run in public financed West German television in the 1980s, the Stasi claimed that they had funded this film covertly. And of course, the producers and the writers of the film have denied it. But as soon as this came out, it became clear that that the German networks were not interested in sort of looking into the background of this or investigating it or saying, well, maybe we did something wrong in the 1980s. Maybe similar things are happening today when we pay for contracts for certain filmmakers to put things on TV with us. Maybe we should be, checking more to see if there's this sort of thing going on today. They really didn't respond at all or do anything.
Great. You mentioned the fact that there are continuing fears in responding to disinformation, that by responding to them, we will also amplify the disinformation itself. In that regard, I would just like to point out, before I give the word to Edward, that there also are examples globally that show that this is not necessarily a relevant fear, and especially in the time of crisis. The Taiwanese government, for example, managed to test a system where they were actually identifying disinformation before they became mainstream and responded to them before they managed to spread massively. And they have seen some major successes in that area. And I think that might be an approach that other countries might want to replicate in the future as well. Also, I can see that Martin joined us again. Martin, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Do you want to finish
Finally.
your speech from earlier?
Well, I do not even know what was the last you could hear from me. Can you remember this? What was because it seems to me that I said something and didn't know that you cannot hear me any longer. Therefore,
right.
what
We heard last in general from you was the fact that you are not expecting any big rallies in Austria, and that the situation is slightly calmer than in other countries. And maybe you could follow up on that and tell us why do you think there is this difference? Because both Germany and the Czech Republic are seeing some major disruptions, and I would be interested in your opinion. Why do you think Austria is more immune towards this?
Well, I wouldn't say that it is totally immune in that sense that it would be better than the Czech Republic or Germany. Of course, it is not. Only today, the head of the Freedom Party, Mr. Hoover, whom I have mentioned already, predicted or threatened, it is not totally clear, I quote, meetings of a size which you have never seen before. This means against the vaccination and against third lockdown. But to be honest, it seems to me that so far, maybe the situation will change, but so far, sorry, it seems to me that these are empty words. As you know, Christmas and then New Year's Eve are imminent. I cannot imagine that between Christmas and New Year we will have any huge rallies in downtown Vienna. This is not really credible. But maybe there could be more unrest because of a possible third lockdown. Because a lot of people already say that it will be a third lockdown will be inevitable, maybe in February or in March. Well, let's see. What I would like to mention is, at least shortly, that the situation during the second lockdown aggravated because of a terrorist attack we had in downtown Vienna on November the 2nd, as you certainly have heard. This was, of course, a special situation, the terrorist danger, but it was, we had, so to speak, good luck, because it was only, well, 4 people died and the terrorist was shot by police. It was a lonely wolf. It was not a well orchestrated attack of, I don't know, 10 or 20 or more terrorists, because that would have been much more difficult to handle for the Austrian security agencies. But this was, of course, well, not that nice to hear, that people have died on places in downtown Vienna where everybody who lives here has been a million times. As to and a couple of words about the Russian vaccination, Sputnik V. So far, nobody in Austria has seriously proposed to buy this. As far as I know, not even the Freedom Party, which had in the past a very pro-Russian foreign policy platform. Not even this party has put forward the idea to buy this, and I cannot imagine that Austria will do this. Maybe Hungary will do this, but well, that's up to Mr. Orban to decide. In Austria, I cannot really imagine this. The Freedom Party, since the Ibiza Gate scandal erupted in May last.
Martin, we lost you again. I'm so sorry. Yeah, we can see you, but we cannot hear you anymore. Can you maybe please try again to log out and log in, and we'll get back to you once you are back with us. All right, so let me turn to Edward at this moment. Natalie, Douglas, and Martin have described what the situation looks like, what are the connotations, but from your point of view, could you tell us, how do you see this all falls into the overall political goals of authoritarian regimes like Russia and China, and what can we expect, how this COVID situation will impact our relationship with those powers in the future?
Well, thanks very much indeed, Veronica, and to your colleagues in Prague and to the other people on the panel. I'm in the usual position of someone who goes last, in that other people have made a lot of the points that I wanted to make. So congratulations, Douglas, Natalie, and Martin, for saying in advance some of the things I was going to say. I think that the first point to make here is that there is no clear dividing line between the exogenous and the endogenous threat. We have had cranks in our health system since the days that vaccination was invented. I recently came across a book published during the war, when every sheet of paper and bit of fuel was an absolute premium. Britain was fighting for its life, that the authorities still found resources to publish a book claiming that the great enemy of civilization was constipation, and it went through many editions. My sister's a doctor, so I gave this to her for her birthday. So cranks are not new. Resentment of sort of behavioral constraints is not new. Again, going back to the war, we needed to have a blackout during the war so that we wouldn't get bombed, and people hated the blackout. They thought it was an infringement on their freedom. And so it's part of a free society that people think and say and do crazy, sometimes even destructive things. And one of the difficulties we've got is that we tend to ascribe everything we don't like to the Russians and the Chinese. And this is a mistake. No Russian tanks went through the streets of London saying we have to open our financial system to dirty money. No Chinese submarines surfaced off Delaware saying they were going to bombard the state of Delaware if it didn't permit Chinese financial entities to enjoy the benefits of corporate anonymity there. And it's the same with disinformation. Nobody made us offer broadcasting licenses and space in our information systems to these malign foreign actors, and the people who believe in them were not parachuted in from outside. They are our fellow citizens, and they grew up like us. They have the same jobs as us. They were raised the same way as we are. They live in the same sort of places. They are among us. So I see, Natalie, I would say that is not true if you're a Cossack. It's true for in most cases. But so there's no clear dividing line. We're not dealing with a kind of a sharp-edged threat from outside. We're dealing with something which is already here in our society, but which the malign actors are stimulating, in some cases encouraging, training, educating, and financing. And so this is a real difficulty, because it's part of what makes our society free is this sort of behavior is tolerable. And if we just take a Russian or Chinese approach and try and ban it, then we're actually mirroring their system. So I think that our efforts on the resilience side in trying to cope with this can only be part of the answer. Yes, we need to look at social trust. We need to look at the way in which countries like Finland have very high levels of social trust in decision makers and in institutions. We need to ask why other countries, perhaps the ones we live in, have low levels of social trust, and we need to take social trust as a national security asset and really concentrate on protecting it against attacks, boosting it, seeing, treating it as a thing rather than just as a being like the weather. We may need to go after particular disinformation actors. For example, if a doctor is coming out with anti-vaccine propaganda, maybe that's incompatible with the Hippocratic Oath. Maybe there are professional normative or sanctions that can be brought in. Maybe there are normative ones. So we can look at every aspect of this inside our system, but we'll always risk playing catch up. And the bit of the problem we can see may not be the bit that really matters. One of the problems with information operations is they tend to be conspicuous, but they're often just the tip of the iceberg. There's often a lot of other stuff going on. And so you need to see them in the round as part of influence operations. And maybe some other part of the influence operation is actually much more important. I actually worry more about dirty money in our politics than I do about dirty information on the computer screens overall. So we need to take a holistic approach and to make sure we're focusing on the bit of the problem that matters rather than just the bit of the problem we can see. And if we do that right, we will, if we're lucky, get up to kind of Finnish or Estonian or Lithuanian or Latvian, wherever levels of resilience. We will be a much harder target, and some of these operations won't happen because they will say there's no point. And we can see already that the RT tried broadcasting in Swedish and it gave up. It just didn't work. RT Sweden was a failure. But I think we also got to think about it in terms of deterrence, because the upstream really matters here. And I was so glad that Douglas mentioned the Active Measures Working Group and their work on the KGB's HIV/AIDS myth. Because one of the important things about that was that although the Active Measures Working Group had very little resources and it was wasn't exactly the sort of beating heart of the State Department at the time, they did manage to get Ronald Reagan's attention, and he called out Gorbachev on it. And he said to Gorbachev, I think it was at the Reykjavik summit, your guys are talking all this nonsense, you've got to stop it. And Gorbachev said, oh no, it's nothing to do with us. And Reagan pressed him very hard. And the instruction went out to stop at least that particular disinformation operation. So I think we need to apply all the tools of statecraft to this. Now, it may be that there is an upstream financial response. Maybe we can follow the money. Maybe we want something that's quite asymmetric. We could say to the Russians or the Chinese, if you want to sell product X in our system, you're going to have to lay off this stuff because we see what you're doing and we don't like it. Now, we have to be aware when we do that, it won't stop. There will still be anti-vaxxers. There will still be people not wanting to wear masks. There will still be people who question medical science or whatever. But at least we've taken the sort of Kremlin fuel out of the tank. But we need to be absolutely clear, this is just as much an attack on our system as if it was a submarine in our territorial waters, a warplane going into our airspace, or a team of assassins walking the streets of one of our cities. Actually, I'll take that back because that just happened in Berlin and it didn't seem to lead to any enormous change. But we need to, our threat sensitization to this needs to be at a high level. We need a security culture in which we are willing to exchange information quickly about threats across the private and public, government, non-government, classified, non-classified divides. Get the analysis of the information operation or the influence operation up to decision makers and have them thinking very clearly in terms of escalation ladders and de-escalation, what you will say to the Chinese Communist Party or to the Kremlin about this. Now, it may be the best thing to do is to ignore it. Maybe the best thing to do is to ridicule it. Maybe there is some on the ground thing we can take, but that should be a conscious choice. It should not be the default setting that we just sit back and say, oh, well, it's information, First Amendment, what can we do? That is just handing the initiative to our adversaries. But I think if we put together a active defense, looking at social trust, the weaknesses in our information system, why does this stuff work, and try and plug that using the examples of other countries which are there that are really good at dealing with it, coupled with the levers of statecraft applied to the perpetrators, saying we can make life much more difficult for you, and if you stop doing this there'll be rewards, and if you carry on there'll be punishments. Then I think we've got a pretty good toolkit. One further thing I would say is that we've, of course, have neglected our own information operations within the target countries, within our adversaries, and I would be delighted if we would be a little bit more robust and engaged in our support for the very many people in Russia who don't like the Kremlin and the very many people in China who are languishing under the misrule of the Chinese Communist Party. So we have some weapons in our arsenal as well. But I'll stop there and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Edward. You laid down the necessary steps very comprehensively, and I would like to stay within this debate for a little longer and talk more about those solutions just proposed. I would like to ask Natalie and Douglas. So what Edward just said, is something like that plausible in Germany? If so, why yes, why not? What would have to change? And secondly, I would also like to ask you, because Natalie, originally you mentioned that a lot of the people who are protesting or who are inclining towards believing disinformation narratives regarding COVID are actually not people who are usually believing in conspiracy theories. Sometimes they are very highly educated and probably are not, in those like fringe circles where there's no coming back from. From which I would think that we still have a chance to win their hearts and minds if we do it right. The way I see it, the thing that I see as problematic here in the Czech Republic, and I'm not sure if the case is the same in Germany, is that people who oppose the measures, wearing face masks, who don't want to stay at home under lockdown, are often people who show their sort of reluctance to trust the government as a whole. Like, they don't like the prime minister, they don't like the ruling party, so they don't like the countermeasures. And in this sense, it's probably very difficult for the government to like come up with any solution, because anything that they do will be automatically disregarded because they don't have the trust of the people. So what would you propose how we can overcome this problem? Natalie, you first, and then Douglas. I would like to ask you later on to add anything if you have something.
Well, the ball is really on the side of the German government, and I must say that we've had some troubling mistakes and incidents committed by first the Chancellor herself, who likes to, in my view, sometimes indulge in not infantilizing, but she's has a doctorate in physics. She's able to lecture well. She comes from East Germany, and she's trying to make her point sometimes in ways that do not reach the target group. I heard an interview on RT, of course, about somebody complaining about the chancellor that referred to the fact that she had been calling the Querdenker people who should consult a shrink. This is not something you say when you're the head of the government about people who've elected you, not automatically elected you, your party, but you're governing. Because you are not going to reach them with the message you want to bring across. And especially as an East German, I would be reluctant to go down the psychiatric argumentation with the heavy burden of East German history in that regard. This was really a blunder. And the accumulation of blunders doesn't make the strategic communication with regard to COVID and the related or the acceptation of the measures easier. When you want to reach out to a target group, you don't start by insulting them. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was at the beginning, this kind of knee-jerk reaction of some government officials to call the people disagreeing and demonstrating Nazis. You know, Nazis is the usual insult in Germany. Everybody's a Nazi who disagrees with you, basically. This is not the way. You cannot reach a target group that is being or at risk of being co-opted by hostile fringes of society by insulting them. If you do that, you push them, you throw them in the arms of those people. So this is not smart. There has not been concrete steps of outreach, and there is another dimension that is missing, I think, in the German debate. It's leading by example. To give you an example, we've seen former American presidents reaching out and saying they would get the vaccination. First, they got tested, and it was broadcasted very instantly and went down through social media. We haven't seen this in Germany. We have not seen that dimension of the strategic communication, and it is what is missing. So they have to lead by example. They have to stop insulting those people. And then I think the message can come across. I'm not saying these people who are against vaccination are going to run and get a vaccination, but what I'm saying is that the other side that aims at manipulating these people and co-opting the protest wave are going to be less successful.
Great, thank you. Douglas, would you add anything? How plausible are responses that Edward presented before Germany?
Well, first I want to say I'm only speaking for myself, not any of my employers, past, present, or future. In case one of them's listening, I think what Natalie said is absolutely correct. When you're talking about the domestic aspects of it, part of the problem in terms of deterrence, in terms of deterring Russia from engaging in such behavior, is I don't know if the major politicians in Germany, the major political parties, they're very divided about, how to deal with Russia. And there's certainly a large lobby here in German industry that wants to, basically end all sanctions with Russia. They see it as a supplier of cheap raw materials. I mean, it sort of goes back to, I don't know, perhaps it's putting it neatly as an American or whatever, that want to go back to the idea of a Rapallo policy with Russia and the sanctions. It's good for the US, it's good for the German economy. it sort of reminds me in the United States of all these dreams about the China market and how that's so important for U.S. industry and U.S. economy. It goes back to the 19th century. There's certain illusions about, how important this industry is. The other is sort of the illusion. I think it's also a misinterpretation of the idea of Ostpolitik. Every time, many, especially in the SPD, but in other parties, although I think some people in the SPD are actually much smarter than this, but still there are some leading individuals in the SPD, especially, but in other parties, who say, oh, we need to do like Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik. And they forget that it was sort of in a different era, it was under different conditions, that there was this very much coordination with the other Western countries, with all of the allies before they engaged in Ostpolitik, and that the goal actually of Ostpolitik was also change. And it's something different today in the current atmosphere to say, oh, be nostalgic and say, oh, we need a third Ostpolitik. And I could also say it's very fortunate that the so-called second Ostpolitik in the 1980s with the SPD, but they never came into power to implement it. I think that's part of the problem. Also, you see this also in the example of Gerhard Schröder, the former SPD chancellor, his project with Nord Stream, and with the Russians, with Rosneft, with the fact that they haven't really stood up to him and said, look, you can say you're doing this, but we're not going to bring you in as sort of like the grand statesman for the SPD and have you come to gatherings or whatever, fine, do your business stuff, but we're not going to associate with it. There's no break with him because in a sense they don't want to, or they agree with, I don't know if they agree with what he's doing, but they don't really care that much about it.
Thank you for your response, Douglas. Martin, can you hear us? Do we have you? You're muted. You have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you. So as we've been talking solutions, could you also give us your take on the general approach of Austrian governments towards dealing with Russia? There have been some significant changes during last month, especially after the far-right Freedom Party left the government. Have there been any developments in the positive way, do you think, since then? Or how would you evaluate the situation regarding Austrian-Russian relationship at this moment?
Well, it is true that, of course, there was a certain change of the course in Austrian foreign policy after the very I wouldn't even say pro-Russia, but pro-Putin Freedom Party had to leave the government. We had then, when the Freedom Party was a part of the coalition government with the People's Party, we had a foreign minister, Mrs. Kneißl, who was picked by the Freedom Party, although she was no member of the party. And after the coalition government collapsed, Mrs. Kneißl started to work for RT Deutsch, for the German part of the RT. She wrote a couple of articles, and some of them are very supportive of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline project. And there, this is already one of the most important examples which can be used to highlight the relations between Austria and Russia, because one cannot say that this is only the main interest, or one of the interests of the Freedom Party. It's unfortunately, it's just the opposite, because almost all the political parties are supportive of Nord Stream 2. This is especially important because one of the shareholders of the project is the Austrian, as you maybe have heard, the Austrian OMV, oil and gas monopoly. And its director general, Mr. Seele, is from Germany, by the way. And when he was hired to head the OMV company, it was very well known that he is at very good terms with the Kremlin, with Gazprom, and nevertheless, or maybe just because of this, he was hired to head Austria's most important company. And when about 1 year ago, due to the well-known American sanctions, the construction of Nord Stream 2 project was stopped. There was an outrage in Austrian politics, but the main arguments of the supporters of the project were the same as, let's say, in Germany. Well, we cannot allow the Americans to dictate them their energy policy. We have to, this is no Russian project. It is a European project, or it is in German, Austrian, Russian project. This has nothing to do with geopolitics. This is only business. And especially important interest group is the Austrian Economic Chamber, which is traditionally a very powerful force in Austrian politics, especially in the People's Party. And the head of the Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Mara, is as pro-Putin as his predecessor, Mr. Leitl, was. I don't know whether you have seen that, but you can look up, if you're interested, you can look up that on the YouTube channel. Mr. Putin, when he visits Vienna, which he did in 20 years several times, he always visits the Chamber of Commerce, and he always receives his standing ovations there, and then makes some weak jokes, and everybody laughs. I mean, it is really embarrassing to see this. It is really very embarrassing. But well, as this is not the intention of
I'm really sorry, but we lost you again, Martin. Yeah, we get you. We can't hear you, unfortunately. And I'm really sorry. I'm not sure why this problem keeps occurring. But I would like to say that we are actually coming slowly to the end of this debate. So I would like to pose the last question to Edward. Edward, when you look at a crystal ball regarding this whole situation, what do you see? I mean, there are a couple of scenarios that I can personally imagine. I mean, I can imagine nobody gets vaccinated and it's all gonna end in a disaster. I can also imagine that a lot of people will realize that disinformation actually cause material visible harm to public health, because suddenly it's not just some abstract idea of disinformation sowing distrust, but we can actually see the negative impact of them in our daily lives. So we might actually come out of this crisis with better awareness about how information and disinformation operations work. I mean, we could also all get chipped by Bill Gates, if you ask some people. So according to your opinion, how we will overcome this crisis? Will we actually learn from this? Will this be some kind of a wake-up call, or do we keep repeating our mistakes?
Well, I'm always very skeptical of the whole idea of wake-up calls. I think perhaps having had aged children, I know that a wake-up call isn't necessarily followed by anything other than more sleep and more wake-up calls. I think there's several points here. One is that there's always a gap between technology and the normative and regulatory response, and that's been true of everything since the printing press, the motor car, the aeroplane, and so on. And we've had this enormous technological leap, and it's not surprising, really, that we don't have a full range of legal and other instruments to deal with. There's always an element of catch up, and in that gap between what technology offers malefactors and the ability of law-abiding good people to defend themselves, that's the kind of the conflict zone. And we have actually already got a lot better, given the internet. I think the iPhone's only about 10 or 15 years old, and the idea that you could launch a global disinformation campaign from something that in your pocket at the cost of pennies would have seemed quite startling for most of the last 1,000 years of 2,000, 3,000 years of human history. So we are making progress, and we will continue to do it. I think on the pandemic, I think that there's been two quite important things. One is it's moved the whole question of disinformation out of the geopolitical niche into the center of discussion. So whether or not, whatever view you have on Russia or China or Iran or the Middle East or whatever, even if it seems very far away, you worry about anti-vaxxers, because if people don't take their vaccinations, you and your family are at greater risk. And so the idea that this overlap, or the way in which disinformation, particularly over the internet, fuels both vaccine non-compliance and lockdown breaking behavior, this is now really central. So for people like us, we can get attention in the way that perhaps we wouldn't before. I was very encouraged, for example, to see Melinda Gates saying this is the #1 problem. I think she said, or a very important problem in America is the anti-science propaganda. I think, secondly, that this is a vindication for science. Although the loonies have had a very good run, this is actually an absolute triumph. We've gone from not having a vaccine to having a vaccine in less than a year, and a startlingly important kind of vaccine. I won't bore on about how important RNA vaccines are, but this is just the beginning. We've also, incidentally, had news about understanding how proteins fold, which are going to revolutionize a whole range of biomedical science. So we're actually in a very positive age for this, and the benefits will be highlighted. And I also think, thirdly, that there are some democracies that have done very well. We have tended to highlight the failure of particularly the United States, my country, Britain, the very disappointing thing, frightening things that happened in Italy, very worrying, disappointing in Sweden, which seems to be taking things differently, and so on. So there's a lot of doom and gloom. If you look at it from East Asia, it's not so bad, and I would point particularly to Taiwan, but also New Zealand and some other countries, which have shown that with the right combination of social cohesion and technology and really good government, you can actually do really well. And this is a startling rebuke to the idea that this has vindicated the Chinese Communist Party. So if I look into my crystal ball, it looks quite optimistic. The problem is that in the short term, this is a huge shock in many Western countries, and it ranks along with the failure of the Iraq War, the financial crisis, and now this. And if you believe that West European governments are the best thing going, and this is a sort of model for the rest of the world, that faith has had 3 really serious kicks in the last 20 years, and that is ultimately our fault. That wasn't Russia and China. They may take advantage of it. So I think the ball is really firmly in our court, but the prospects are potentially quite bright.
Thank you, Edward, for your cautious optimism, let's say. So the very last thing, Natalie Douglas, I would like to ask you to give us some closing remarks. Do you share Edward's cautious optimism, or do you have a different view on what is ahead of us? Natalie.
I certainly think that we have reasons to be optimistic. But then again, we have to learn from history as well. So as Douglas explained very well, what is happening on the propaganda front is nothing new. They've been doing this for decades. They will go on doing this for decades. They just have other means. It's up to us to build resilience. I know we've been saying this for the last 6 years. Every meeting on the topic is repeating. We need to learn we need a lessons learned every time, and we need to learn from countries that have actually been successful in rolling back these waves of A, influence operations, B, disinformation. we've been preaching to the choir most of the time because we all agree. What is our problem really? Our problem is not even the intelligence community. The intelligence community agrees with us. The problem is that the reports get nowhere. The reports, the step from the security community to the governmental level, the right eyes never read what they need to read, and this is why we're stuck. So that was my last point. And on that point, I'm not very optimistic, no.
Thank you, Natalie. Douglas, do you have anything you would like to share with us as the very last words of this panel today?
Well, certainly I agree with Natalie when it comes to the political leadership in certain Western countries. I would say also in the United States. I mean, we see sort of this, part of it has to do with framing. I mean, in the United States, for example, Donald Trump successfully framed the battle against the coronavirus as either you have things open and someday comes this great, vaccine, or you have to close everything down, destroy the economy, and basically have a stock market with zero, and go back to the Stone Ages. I mean, that's a question of framing, and I think also the problem is then one of political will, where either you say, oh, we're on a path of Cold War or war with Russia, or we're going to be best friends with Russia. Well, there are a lot of alternatives in between there. I think that's one aspect, in the polarization of politics in some cases makes it very difficult to have any sort of nuanced argument, any sort of middle way. I think that is something, I'm not exactly sure how, but that definitely has to change. And another thing I think that's important for the long term is, like if we're going through Twitter or Facebook and we see something, it doesn't necessarily ring a bell unless maybe you're an expert. You say, oh, that's Russian disinformation, that's Chinese disinformation, that's Iranian disinformation. I think what's important is also, in the long term, is also education of people, digital literacy, of being, more aware about how social media work, or, what to be aware of on social media. But also, even above and beyond that, I think, especially we're talking about conspiracy theories and disinformation, there's so much that could be done if people are taught basic logic again in schools, or what are logical fallacies, or how do you identify a conspiracy theory, or maybe from the beginning you should be basically think all conspiracy theses are wrong until you have proof of the opposite. And I think that sort of civic education needs to be strengthened and brought back. And in some countries, I think in the United States especially, but probably also in Germany and other countries, there needs to be more work done on that.
All right, thank you. I think we managed to put together a couple of very interesting points and suggestions on how Western countries and democratic countries should actually approach these situations in the future. And hopefully we will see some positive developments, and we will actually fulfill the cautious, optimistic viewpoint. I would like to thank you all, Edward, Douglas, Natalie, and Martin, for sharing your expertise with us today. It was a pleasure for me to be your moderator. And I would just like to wish you happy holidays. Stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully we will be able to see each other in 2021 during one of our next debates, be it online or offline. I'll be definitely looking forward to it. So thank you very much. And thank you also to the audiences who are watching us today and spent the time last hour and a half listening to us talking about not that pleasant, but very, very important things.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.